Hello, good morning, Professor Alias. You can check.
Can I share my screen?
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Today's presentation, Cartography and Geovisualization Day, is about to begin. Honorable Professor Alias Abdul Rahman from University of Malaysia and Dr. Amy Griffin from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Australia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sehat untuk kita semua. It is my pleasure to be a moderator for today's plenary session on cartography and geovisualization. My name is Aji Putra Perdana from Badan Informasi Geospasial, Geospatial Information Agency of the Republic of Indonesia. And on behalf of the committee, I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. And we hope we will learn a lot today. On this occasion, we would like to have the first keynote speaker from Dr. Amy Griffin on the topic Trustworthy Maps, Case Studies from Managing Emergency. Sorry. We will have 45 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes for discussion. Before the presentation begins, allow me to introduce Dr. Amy Griffin. She's a senior lecturer in Geospatial Science at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. She has a BA Honors in Geography from Macalester College, USA, and an MSc or PhD in Geography from Penn State University, USA. She is a past president of the North American Cartographic Information Society. She is a co-chair of the International Cartographic Association Research Commission on Cognitive Issues in Information Visualization. She is the current editor of Cartographic Perspective. Her cartographic research interests include investigating how perceptual cognitive affective process influence how people read maps and think and reason with maps and related information graphics. A lot of her work on cartography. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the keynote speakers today to deliver the presentation. All right, Dr. Amy Griffin, the time is yours.
Great, thank you, Aji. I'm just going to Try and get my screen shared properly here.
And that's good.
That's good?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, I can start.
Wonderful. Okay, selamat pagi, assalamualaikum. I'd really like to thank Kandra Kartika for the invitation to speak to you today. And for the organizers for putting on this really nicely organized symposium. I very much hope that someday I might be able to come in person in the future to find out more about the work that you're doing in Indonesia. I was really very impressed by the talk that Professor Marfai gave on Monday about what the Indonesian Geospatial Agency is doing these days. And I would love the opportunity to learn more about that. So when Kandra invited me to give this talk, I started to think a little bit about what I've been working on that might be of particular interest to you in Indonesia. And one of the things that our two countries share is a lot of exposure to environmental hazards. In Indonesia, of course, this is largely because of your position on the Ring of Fire. And in Australia, our hazards are of a bit different nature. They're mostly climatological. Either too much rain or not enough rain, and the things that happen as a result of either of those scenarios. And of course, like everywhere else in the world, we also now share the experience of the biggest disaster to happen in recent times, COVID-19. So whatever the disaster, maps are often central to the way that we try to manage and mitigate the effects of disasters, and decision makers of all sorts, ranging from individual citizens walking down the street to presidents and prime ministers, they benefit from knowing where disasters are occurring and who is being affected by those disasters. And we use maps to inform, but also to persuade. We can use maps when we ask residents to take a particular course of action, to show them what to do or why we want them to do it. But a fundamental prerequisite for this actually working is that the map needs to be trustworthy. The person who is using or reading the map needs to trust that it's providing them with information that's useful and accurate. So I'm not going to tell you today that I have the answers to all of the answers to this problem of how we make sure that maps are trustworthy and that these trustworthy maps are being used to make decisions, but I am going to explore how the broader information environment and recent changes in it makes it really important that we work on understanding what makes maps trustworthy to inform our work as map designers. To do that, I'll explore some case studies of maps of COVID-19, and also I'll talk a little bit about some case studies and ongoing work that we're doing in Australia with bushfire emergency mapping to illustrate 5 questions that I think are very central to thinking about trustworthy maps. All right, so maps are so well trusted that it doesn't really take a lot of searching to find examples of where people have trusted maps when probably they really shouldn't have. So this is an example of some silly tourists who thought that they could drive to an island from the Australian mainland. When they drove their car out, the tide was out and they trusted that their GPS was taking them the right way, even when the road surface started to become a bit soft. And you can see the result. They got their car bogged in the water. So why are we trusting maps so much? And I think one of the reasons of this is because most of the time when we use a map in everyday life, it helps us to do the things that we're setting out to do with it. So for example, we might be able to use a map to find a service, or we might be able to work out how to get from where we are to a place that we want to go. So we might be falling prey to our past experience to predict future performance, even in cases where maybe that's not warranted. So maps have been a trusted source of information, despite the fact that no single map tells the whole truth, irrespective of what the intentions of the map maker are. Anyone who has basic training in map making knows this well, right? All of the decisions that you make as you are building a map, they have an effect on what story that map actually tells, right? So this is an illustration of this. So this is a pair of maps they're made using the same exact data, but they make exactly opposite arguments about what the world is like. One map says the city is dirtier, the other map says the countryside is dirtier. So maps are perhaps undeservedly trusted, given that they're usually made to serve their makers' interests. And this has been pretty convincingly argued by writers like Dennis Wood and some other critical cartographers. But changes in how we make maps and in the availability of spatial data have widened who is able to make maps. And anyone with access to the internet and a basic computer can now make maps that serve their own interests, no matter what they are. If we fast forward 10 years into the future, we might find that many maps are not even made by people anymore. They might be made by bots. These trends, combined with post-truth politics that seem to be taking over political systems in many countries of the world these days, might mean that people trust maps less than they have historically trusted them. So which maps should we trust? The answer to this question, I think, is less clear than ever, other than to perhaps say that the map that you can trust the most is the one that you made yourself, assuming that you have some awareness of your own potential blind spots and that you're an informed consumer of spatial information that can evaluate the quality of the data that you're using to make your map. Therefore, a theme I think needs much more research attention and more focus in the coming years is this concept of trust, specifically understanding how, when, and why people trust maps and mapping processes. If we want people to engage constructively with the information that we present to them in maps, they first need to trust what they see, right? And one place that we can probably need to start thinking about that concept of trust is starting by thinking about just what is trust, right? What does it mean in the context of maps and mapping? Do we trust information because we know it's true, because it's reliable, because it fits our worldview, or maybe it needs to do all of those things for the map to be trustworthy? So I'll start by exploring the concept of trust. Trust is fundamental to the success of a wide range of social activities. In fact, most cooperation between people involves trust in some way, and this trust can be needed for cooperation at many different scales, ranging from the household to the global scale. Although we all have experience with it, and we can often identify when we feel it or when we don't feel it, in fact, there's no general agreement among scholars about what constitutes trust, and different disciplines have defined and conceived of trust in different ways depending on how that discipline thinks about the world. But if you look at the literature, there's two different notions of trust. One is called interpersonal or institutional, and that's where trust comes from direct interactions between people or entities. The other is generalized or social, and that comes when there's trust that exists between people, but it doesn't have any grounding in past direct experience between those actors. But is trust the same thing as trustworthiness? I'd actually like to distinguish between those two. Trustworthiness is about believability, credibility, authenticity, predictability, or reliability. And importantly for our consideration of maps, because they are instruments that capture someone's knowledge or thoughts in some way, trust is fundamental to the process of generating knowledge. Without trust, the reader won't believe what they see in the map. And this links to this interpersonal or institutional type of trust by framing several important questions. For example, who produced the map and why should we believe the knowledge claims that are presented in that map? We can think about several elements of trustworthiness that are relevant to understanding how it relates to maps. First, there's the knowledge claim itself. What is being argued or told in the map? This is where the trust actually lies, in some knowledge. Secondly, the trust is consequential on the informant and their motivations. So who is telling us something? Who is telling us that knowledge claim, and what authority do they have to know that thing? Why should we believe them? And finally, where or how is that trust embodied? What are the things used to inscribe the trust? Numbers, words, names, scientific instruments, maps, etc. So let's explore sources of authority. And here are two that you might be familiar with from your own country and the eruption of Mount Merapi in 2010. So the person on the top, if you don't know him, is Serrano. He was at the time the chief volcanologist, and he was saying people should evacuate this area. The volcano is going to erupt. The man on the bottom was the gatekeeper of Mount Merapi. So he was a spiritual man who talked to the mountain. He didn't want to evacuate, and unfortunately, when the mountain erupted, he died on the mountain because he didn't evacuate. They're both sources of authority. Some people believed one and not the other, right? So these are there are multiple sources of authority that can inform maps, right? So they might be people in the case of these two examples. They might be processes. So they might be things like eyewitness versus science. And we might contrast those things as being non-systematic observation or systematic observation. And we might also find authority in the form of something. And in the case of maps, we might look at their appearance. So does the map look official? How does it compare to other maps? Does it say the same thing as other maps of the same place? Or does the map have a familiar appearance that we recognize? So this is nothing new. This has been going on for hundreds of years. This is a map from the 1500s. And in 16th century Europe, accuracy became a standard for judging maps, with cartographers attempting to persuade the buyers, potential buyers of their maps, that their maps could be trusted because maps were valued for their ability to reflect reality and to capture the world with exactness. So commercial map makers who were trying to sell their maps, they made all kinds of proclamations about the accuracy of their maps. So a quote from the person who made this map, Paolo Forlani, said, "Behold, kind readers, a new description of the world, which is the most distinct, faithful, exact, and is consistent with the navigations and the histories of all that has heretofore been seen by you." Now, of course, in the 1500s, the location capturing technologies that people were working with were, of course, much more inaccurate and much more imprecise than what we use today. But this problem notwithstanding, cartographers sought methods of visually conveying the authority of their maps. And so they adopted visual rhetorical strategies such as verisimilitude, which is giving the map the appearance of being true or real. And in doing so, they sometimes depicted an idealized form of what they were mapping rather than the actual form. So for example, the famous painter Leonardo da Vinci, he also made maps of a few places. And in one particular place called Imola, he straightened the streets so that it would look tidier and more inviting of a place. And so he actually decreased the accuracy of his maps to try and depict it as a particular kind of place. Right. And historians of cartography have even identified a number of these strategies. And so some examples include including annotations that signal the authoritativeness, like referencing certain sources. So in the case of these times, it was referencing Ptolemy's geography. They often took the trope of imitating nature. They used the word new, because new meant that their map was the most current, right? Or the most up to date. They pointed out errors in other maps, and they included high levels of detail, implying that the map was reliable. Now we can see these same strategies at work today. So this is a map that's much more recent. Everyone, I think, who has an internet connection has seen this map because of its importance in the last couple of years. But if we look at the aesthetic strategies applied here, we can see some of the same things. So for example, at the bottom of the screen, you can see a bar that has a whole bunch of different sources, right? So it's telling you that it's full of authoritative information. It's emphasizing the currentness of the data by having the little, in the lower left corner, it's got the time and the date, right? So it says just how recent is that data. And it's got a high level of detail, implying that the data are all reliable, right? So some of these same strategies are perpetuating across centuries, really. Okay, so in thinking about this, I want to raise 5 questions for thinking about the trustworthiness of maps, and I will illustrate each of them with some examples of maps of coronavirus and other emergencies that we've been working with in recent years. And so hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will feel convinced that these are 5 important questions we should all be asking about our maps, but I'm very interested to hear your views if you think these are the right questions or if I've missed some. Perhaps I have. All right, so let's take each of these in turn. So the first question is, which information should be mapped, right? So a fundamental decision when creating any map, of course, is which source of information do we use? Before the internet, spatial information was harder to come by. It was often held closely by government departments or had to be compiled painstakingly by hand. Some of the authority that map readers give to maps probably comes from this historical information asymmetry. Now, the internet has changed things. It has made it much more easy for citizens to cooperate with each other, to challenge official data sources, to crowdsource data sets that support challenging people who are in authority. And journalists, likewise, just like the government, have also been impacted by these developments because their role as trusted suppliers of the authoritative version of events can now be more easily challenged by people who have their own data. As a map reader, being capable of critically interrogating a map to understand the extent to which the information can be trusted is now more important than ever, because there are so many different possible sources of information for many phenomena. It's also a critical skill for map makers, right? Because we have a number of sources to choose between, and they have different levels of quality and different levels of trustability, right? So let's look at a practical example of this, right? So there are many, many maps of coronavirus. We're probably super sick of maps of coronavirus, honestly. But here's an early one. So if you did a search early in the pandemic on Google for coronavirus map, this is the first thing that came up. It's a map from Wikipedia, and the data set that underpins this map also comes from Wikipedia. And it's a mashup of sources of widely differing levels of authority and reliability, depending on where you are in the world. And Wikipedia, as we all know, it can be edited by anyone. And so the data quality can vary depending on who has contributed to the edit, their knowledge of reliable sources, and sometimes on their politics or other motivations. And in fact, when I went looking at the edit history for the Wikipedia page whose information is fed into this map, it wasn't very hard to find one of these instances, which you see at the bottom of this screen. So although lots of errors or edits that are made by people with particular intentions can be corrected very quickly by other editors, anyone who's inspecting that map at a given point in time might be looking at unreliable information, meaning that the trustworthiness of the information as well as the map actually varies dynamically. So it's not just a static thing, and it can change. When we're thinking about COVID map examples here, we can also look at the dimension of what is the variability in this data set. So if one accepts that Wikipedia's data might not be sufficiently trustworthy, where could you find more authoritative, if slightly less timely information? So we could go to the WHO, right? The WHO data must meet case definition standard, but their data are only reported weekly and only in aggregate over that week. Wikipedia, on the other hand, has daily updates with that frequency in most countries. The source quality, however, varies very substantially, which you can actually see here if you look at the detail. Some countries' case numbers come from newspapers or radio broadcasts rather than from official sources. And countries can revise their reporting methods over time, making some time points not comparable to other time points. In addition to this, and complicating things further, some spatial data sets are now being generated by automated sensors or machines, presenting additional challenges for understanding their trustworthiness. For example, Jeremy Crampton and his group have identified that sometimes in social media data, the data are actually generated by bots and not even by people. So we can ask the question, do bots create trustworthy data? Maybe for some types of observations, but maybe not for others. There's also the problem that algorithms that are developed to deal with some very big data sets produced by sensors sometimes have biases of their developers. So they produce outcomes that might be unreliable or untrustworthy because of the processing that's been applied to the data rather than the measurement that the sensor actually made. And sensors themselves can actually be untrustworthy sources of information, as this short video will demonstrate to you. So this is a performance art project that was done by an artist in Berlin. And he was doing sort of a project where he was trying to subvert the sensors. So he got 99 smartphones. he opened them up and opened Google Maps in all of them. He put them in this wagon that you can see here, and he walked along the street. And what you'll see in the map, as the video gets further in, here we go, as you can see across the bridge, as he's going across, the bridge turns red, right? Meaning that there's high levels of traffic, or Google thinks there's high levels of traffic there, right? So not only is he changing the map by walking on the sidewalk with this wagon, but he might actually be rerouting drivers, right? Because Google's algorithms might then send them on a different path because it thinks that there is bad traffic in these places where you can see actually, in fact, there's hardly any traffic whatsoever. So we really need to be able to think about how this changes dynamically, and what are the things that we need to be able to evaluate about these real-time or near real-time data sets that tell us whether they are trustworthy or not. Okay, so let's move to the second question. The second question is, what is the quality and certainty of the information that we're mapping? Trustworthiness is not just a property of the whole data set, but it can vary spatially across the data set. And even with a generally trustworthy data set, there are limits to the level of trust that a map reader should put in the map because of the uncertainty in the information. And knowledge of the uncertainty associated with particular pieces of information helps the map reader to answer the question of how much trust to put in the information. Many researchers believe that communicating uncertainty to map readers will help them to make more effective and accurate use of information and increase their trust in science or in the data producer. And there's been quite a lot of research effort that's gone into developing and testing methods for showing uncertainty visually on maps and lots of other kinds of information graphics. There have also been studies that have looked at decision making with this uncertain information, but there's been relatively little focus on how judgments of trust are derived from uncertainty representations and how they might propagate into the decision-making processes of the map reader. So although some studies suggest that if people have trust in the process that created data, that they'll then trust the information, a lot of that research has been done with people who are scientists and people like that with a lot of technical knowledge about uncertainty. A lot less is known about how people in the general public, whether representing uncertainty for them is helpful, and whether it increases or decreases their trust in the information that they're looking at. Now, an intriguing study that relates to disasters comes from Sarah Fabricant's group, and I'm showing you these maps here. They did a study where they were looking at the case of people buying a house in a potential hazard risk zone. In this case, it was avalanches, because that's one of the hazards they have in Switzerland. And they were asking whether the person was going to buy a property or not, and the house might or might not have been located in one of these risk zones. And one of the things that they found in the study was that putting the uncertainty information onto the map actually made people more likely to buy a more risky house, because they were reasoning that, oh, it might not actually be risky because the risk information was uncertain. So this is a case where they actually make a maladaptive decision when we put the uncertainty on the map. They make a poorer decision and they buy in a higher risk location. So we need to ask whether presenting uncertainty information is beneficial in all contexts. In Australia, we were interested in whether people trusted information in their bushfire emergency mapping apps. So 2 of my students and I decided to do a study where we asked people how they use the map apps and to what degree they trusted the information within them. We hypothesized that this might vary depending on the participants' knowledge and familiarity with the area of risk. There were some studies in the literature that suggested that local residents might trust the official maps less because they were relying on their own local knowledge of the environmental factors in their area. So these are the findings, or some of the findings from our study. And it showed that local residents were slightly more likely to believe that the information was only slightly accurate, and that tourists sometimes didn't know whether to trust information, with about 10% of tourists who we hypothesized would not have a lot of knowledge of risk of the area. About 10% of them declined to state their level of trust. We also found that slightly more of the local residents believed that the information was not timely. In other words, it was updated with a long delay, but they were also more likely to believe that information was updated quite quickly. So we're not quite sure about why that's happening. This might be due to differences in different fire events and how quickly the data were updated in those different locations, but this is something that we need to investigate a bit further. Okay, so moving on to our third question, who made the map? Fake news, deep fakes, and social media posts that have been generated by troll farms have become prominent topics of conversation in the news media and in academic circles, if maybe not in everyday life. Few studies have been carried out to examine the extent to which maps have been participants in modern misinformation attempts. But given their long history of tools of use as propaganda tools and the fact that maps are very attention grabbing, we should suspect that maps might be being used for misinformation in these new media and platforms. And there are already some at least simple there are already at least some simple, if at this point, relatively harmless bot-generated maps, such as this example on the left-hand side, which is one of about 18,500 or so bot-generated maps that have been created by a bot programmed by Neil Freeman. And he notes about his app, the bot's functional but hardly insightful maps offer a veiled critique of the blind use of data to offer insight. So he's trying to critique the idea that data should always be trusted, right? More misleading is the map on the right, which is a series of bot-generated maps at deforestation versus countries, which is a Twitter account. Over time, this bot's tweeted maps show how much of a country's forest would be left if all global deforestation was occurring in the country, and it maps only one country at a time. The amount of green in this map reduces slowly over time if you come back and look at the tweets over time. And even though recent efforts at creating deepfake maps or bot-generated maps have limitations or are targeted primarily at improving upstream map design processes like updating map data, the technology is going to continue to improve. And so the question of how much should we trust a machine-generated map is an important one. Can we even identify machine-generated maps easily? These are open questions yet to be answered. At the beginning of the pandemic, the average person on the street could have been forgiven for falling victim to a malicious app that hitched a ride on the JHU dashboard website. This malicious app, once downloaded and installed, deployed malware called OzerAlt, which is designed to steal your credentials in the background, among other nefarious things it's doing. To make the user think that they were getting a coronavirus map viewer, the app actually calls the URL of the Johns Hopkins map dashboard, and it displays the results inside the application window. So not only did it look like the dashboard, it was in fact actually showing it. Social engineering is, of course, a time-honored way of preying on the trust of people that a person places in their friends, their family, or their colleagues, right? So it might be that maps that are shared from a person's contacts are more trusted, no matter how trustworthy they actually are, and contributing greatly to the spread of misinformation or disinformation. And studies that compare the sharing of maps to the sharing of other kinds of information on social media could provide us with some important insights into how map-based misinformation might spread. Right? First Draft News, an organization which is devoted to actually finding solutions to disinformation, noted 2020 was the first year that demonstrated conclusively that effective disinformation communities are participatory and networked, while quality information distribution mechanisms are stubbornly elitist, linear, and top-down. They also noted that the fact checks that are deployed against conspiracy theories almost always come from verified sources that are less accessible to the general public. So things like government agencies, news outlets, and scientists. So for those looking to disseminate trustworthy maps, they might need to consider how to get them into communities to preempt the emergence of misinformation. In a bushfire-related example, here are two maps published about the same fire event. One is showing locations as extracted from the Himawari data. So this is some of the data that Alfredo Huete was showing on Monday in his keynote. And this map has been generated by a private company and it's published to the web. The second map of the same fire event is an official map that's presented by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, which is the agency that's actually managing the fire. Notice the difference in generalization and the implied spatial accuracy of the location of the fire, right? Those two maps are quite different. In both these maps, you can zoom in and look at particular areas. And if you're a homeowner who's watching the situation to make decisions about what to do, which of these sources do you trust? Which source should you trust? Which of these actually needs more understanding of bushfire behavior to interpret sensibly to avoid making a life-risking decision? These are open questions. The fourth question is, where did the map appear? Maps can inform, misinform, and disinform, just like any other information source. So it's important to pay attention to the map's context as well as to its author. Ian Muhlenhaus argued that the easy sharing of maps through social media makes it more important than ever to actually educate map readers to be critical consumers of the visual media. Sharing maps can take them out of their original context, causing misinterpretation, as in this example, where people were inferring that the entire continent of Australia was simultaneously on fire. Now, we did have a lot of fire happening, but it wasn't quite that extensive. The image is actually an artist's composite visualization of 1 month of locations where a fire was detected as collected by NASA's Fire Information Resource Management System. So after this spread on Twitter and there was a huge uproar and kerfuffle about it, the artist actually had to clarify, talking about the fact that it was a composite, that not all of the areas were burning at the same time. And, it was, this map, he didn't even make it with the intention of saying something about fire. He made it because he was trying to learn how to use a particular visualization tool. And it just kind of took on a life of its own. And when it didn't have the context of why he was making that map or what the data actually represented, people were making all kinds of crazy inferences about what was actually happening in Australia at the time. In another example of the fact that viral maps cannot always be trusted, even when they come from a reputable source, I give you this exhibit, right? So maps that are trustworthy in one context might not be in another. This is an example from the Australian news media in February of 2020. And several media outlets showed a map that was part of a tweet. This was a tweet done by some UK researchers. The tweet was talking about their new publication, which was about COVID-19. The media reported that the map shown here showed all the locations to which COVID-19 had spread from Wuhan in China, the origin of the outbreak. In actual fact, this map just shows all airline flight routes, and it was from a 2012 study, not from a 2020 study. And the tweeter's intention of using this map in the tweet was just to say that the world is globally networked, right? So as in this case, maps on social media are especially likely to be missing important context and explanation, perhaps even more so on Twitter than other platforms because there's not so many characters for each tweet. So a casual reader scrolling through could be forgiven for making an assumption that the map was the result of the published study. But an examination of the link would actually show you that the map doesn't appear in the paper, but most people would never click on that link. So this airline map was actually shared many, many times, as you can see from this tweet. And in this sharing, the author was noted, perhaps with the intent of signaling the information was authoritative, but there was no actual source document for people to follow back, right? And so it was impossible for people to actually check the trustworthiness of this map. And so it kind of spread like wildfire and took on a life of its own. All right, the final question relates to the form of maps. Now, Judy Tyner wrote a book about persuasive maps, and she defined a persuasive map as one that's designed for the sole purpose of influencing the reader. She sets up a continuum of maps ranging from expository to persuasive, and noting that most maps fall somewhere in the middle of these two extremes, and that all maps are persuasive to some degree because they coax the reader into believing that they're a true representation of the situation. In setting up these opposite poles, there's an implication that expository maps are objective, derived from science, and persuasive maps are subjective, drawing on art. Now, this is maybe, sort of overblown, this sort of opposition, right? But ultimately, all trusted maps are persuasive propositions, right? If a map reader does not find the map to be trustworthy, they haven't been persuaded by the map's propositions. And here I mean proposition in the terms of the map is saying this thing is here, right? All right, so how do maps do this? We can think about Aristotle's rhetorical appeals to ethos, logos, and pathos as being part of this persuasive triangle, right? So ethos relates to the form, logos relates to the idea, and pathos to the emotion or the force. So we can ask, how does a map's form actually convey authority? So Ian Muhlenhaus did a study where he was looking at different rhetorical styles, one of which was this authoritative rhetorical style, which you can see here. It's a style that looks scientific. It looks like the map is based on data. It's got a rich data set. It's got scientific looking presentations. There's a lot of detail. And so these elements prompt the reader to infer that the process that made the map was scientifically rigorous, and that measurement standards were being adhered to, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see from the diagram at the bottom that this was the style of map shown in blue in the left-hand pie chart that was the most trusted of the rhetorical styles. This style is rationalist, right? And so it's persuading people that it's based on evidence, right? And that therefore they should trust what this is telling them, right? We can look at another example, and this is a very interesting example of maps in the wild. So I was doing some work with Carolyn Fish, who's at the University of Oregon, and we were very interested in the trustworthiness of climate change maps and how people responded to them emotionally. And we found this example of a map from an IPCC report, which is the map on the left. And then coincidentally, when we were looking around on the internet for some other examples, we found this map on the right, which is from an organization called the Cato Institute. For those of you who may not have heard of this organization before, it's basically a right-wing think tank in the United States. And you see these two maps, they look very similar to you, right? The symbols are basically the same. The layout is the same. The thing that looks quite different about them is the words around them, right? One is talking about ski areas being at risk. One is talking about ski areas getting more money, right? So it's two, basically what has happened here is the Cato Institute has seen this previous report, decided to very deliberately borrow the style of this scientific report, and in fact even borrow the map. It's the same map, except they have changed the color of the symbols, right? And they've given it a new legend. They basically photoshopped this map to make it suit their purposes. But they're trying to convey an impression of scientific rigor by using the same form that scientists use in their peer-reviewed IPCC report. The Cato Institute report was not peer-reviewed, right? It was done by a couple of guys in an office in Washington, D.C., rather than being based on the work of hundreds of scientists and scientific studies. So they are definitely trying to play on this idea that the form conveys authority. Now, this is not limited just to the form of the map itself. We can also think about what Wood, Fells, and Krieger would call the perimap, the things that surround the map. So in this example here, Artemis Scarlatidou and her colleagues in London did a study of WebGIS users and the maps in WebGIS. And they were looking at the trustability of different sites that were talking about nuclear waste disposal data. And they found that people, when they were making judgments about the trustability of the map, they were also looking not just at the map itself, but at the things around it. So for example, the legend that went with it, the tutorial that helped them to understand how to use the site, the fact that there was a blog that had additional information associated with the map. And all of those things that surrounded the map also affected the trust judgments that they were making about this website and the map.
5 more minutes, Dr.
Yep.
Amy. Yeah.
No worries. Okay, so I've presented to you 5 questions that I think are important for helping us to understand the trustworthiness of maps. So which information should be mapped? What is the quality and the certainty of the information that we're mapping? Who made that map? Where did the map appear? And what form does the map actually take? So I've given you some examples of how I think these questions can be used to look at specific maps to try and identify whether they're trustworthy or not. And I'd be very interested in our discussion period to hear your ideas on whether you think I've missed any questions or whether you found my questions to be convincingly useful. When we're designing maps for use in emergencies, we might ask ourselves what makes them be trusted and how can we design trustworthy maps? So I think we need to have the answers to these questions to be able to do that. And in work in this area of emergency mapping, this is of critical importance, right? The trustability of a map might make it a life-saving tool for people in a difficult situation. So just to kind of summarize the main ideas that I've talked about in this presentation, I think that trustworthiness is fundamental to the work that maps do or don't do in the world, right? If you don't trust the map, it's probably not going to have the desired outcome with the users. Trustworthiness is particularly needed when you're seeking some kind of cooperation from the user, when you're trying to persuade them to take a particular course of action, which we are often trying to do with maps, and in particular, when we're working with emergency maps. We have benefited compared to many other kinds of ways of conveying information with having our medium, maps, be really trusted, right? People have this inherent trust in many maps, but changes in how we acquire data, in how we construct maps, mean that maybe this is no longer warranted, and maybe we need to actually be more skeptical and less trusting of maps. Maps derive their authority from a combination of person, process, and visual form. And these changes in mapping practice that I've talked about introduce some new considerations that we need to understand to actually produce trustworthy maps. So I think that this is a field that is ripe for contribution. I would welcome anyone who's interested in this topic to think about how we could collaborate together, because I think it's really an important one. And one where we could have a lot of impact on making maps that actually matter, making maps that work in the world. And with that, I'll close, and I'm happy to answer any questions you've got.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Griffin, for the informative and interesting talk. Personally, I would love to collaborate with you. It's because from my perspective, trustworthiness is quite new. Let's say it's quite new from Indonesia for Indonesia, and it's very challenging. Okay, I think we have already. Oh, there's a raise hand, Mr. Kamal. Let me first raise hand first, maybe then from the chat box. Mr. Kamal, please go ahead. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, do you hear my voice?
Yeah. I can, yes, thanks.
Okay, I'll try to put my video on. Okay,
I can see you, yeah.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Griffin, for the excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it so much. My name is Kamal from Gadjah Mada University. I think the main purpose of the map is to, like for decision making for everyone at any levels. And sometimes the choice of between the speed of information delivery and the accuracy of maps is contradicting, you know what I mean? Especially especially in map making. For example, in the case of emergency, the speed of information I think is more important than the accuracy of the information itself. So by doing that, we can determine response option quickly before it's too late. Another thing is in the case of the crowdsourcing map, the map is not always accurate, but it's faster because people can just put pinpoint place and then they can upload it into the web and it directly appear on the map. Because it is not accurate because it depends on the understanding of the people about the thing being mapped. What do you think about this situation? Like, is there any win-win solution for this type of contradicting things? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think in the case of emergencies, it's one that I think emergency managers are very much still grappling with. So, for example, you can imagine a scenario where, like I know in 2010, I guess it was, when that very bad earthquake hit Haiti. And there were many, many people who were trapped in, in buildings that had collapsed and all this kind of thing. And people were trying to tweet just to tell someone that they were underneath rubble and all this kind of thing. And so it was an important way in a situation where normal communication channels had been destroyed. In fact, their emergency management agency was leveled by the earthquake, and most of their actual human resources that were experts in this died in the earthquake because they were in the building. And so it was definitely a really like an important way of getting information to people who needed that information. But you can also think of times where relying too much on that source of data about what's happening on the ground could actually blind you to other people who need help, right? Because not everyone has a smartphone. Not everyone's smartphone will be functional because maybe some infrastructure went down and they can't actually use it. So I think you're right that there is a huge tension between the affordances that some of these data sources can give us and being able to handle the situation and prioritize most effectively to reach the biggest number of affected people that we can. And I think it's very much an open question. Twitter is definitely changing the way we manage emergencies in Australia. In fact, increasing proportions of people are getting their disaster update information from Twitter rather than the radio, which is a traditional source. And this reliance on that as a source is vulnerable to infrastructure going down. And there's many cases. In fact, in our study, one of the things that we asked people about was, what could we do to improve these maps? And many of them pointed out that they don't work when the electricity goes out and when the cell towers go down, right? And no one has the solution to this, right? We don't know how to solve this problem. And people's reliance on their devices, their increasing reliance on their devices is becoming problematic. And one thing that was really interesting in the comparison between the tourists and the locals was that the locals were very much more aware of places where the internet didn't work. Tourists are also going to places that are remote, that don't always have good internet connectivity, but they're often coming from cities where there is good internet connectivity, and they don't even think of the fact that their phone might not work when they get there. And so they don't have a backup. They don't have another plan. They don't know what to do. And so it's a huge problem. How we solve it, I don't know yet, but it's definitely one where emergency managers have to collaborate with cartographers to find some solutions that will keep people safe. Because, in Australia, fires are not going to stop. No matter what happens with climate change, we're still going to have fires. And so we need to be able to do something to keep people safe. Mm-hmm. But thanks very much for those observations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Kamal. Now maybe we can continue to the chat box question. Mm-hmm. Amy, do you see the question?
Yeah, I do. Okay. Yeah. Is there any privacy protection? Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I am not entirely certain the answer to that. I do know that we have got some places that are basically like communications installations for satellites, for super secret spy stuff. And I think that they are not allowed to show exactly where those are on the map. But I don't really think that we have a lot of laws about that. But very interestingly, I don't know if this news ever made it to Indonesia, but I think it was last summer, I can't remember exactly when it was, but recently there was a US military installation that was supposed to be secret. It wasn't on any maps. And there was a student in Australia who was doing a summer project, and he was working with data from a company called Strava. Do you guys know what that company is? It's a company that does like, you know, that you can get these devices that go on your wrist, and you can like cycle around with them or run and this sort of thing. And they records where you run and how fast you run and all this kind of thing. And so this student was looking at the Strava data, and they were able to find this secret facility because there were people who worked at that facility who were running. And so it was like an unusual pattern. And he was just looking at maps of the data, and he was able to identify it. So even when there are these regulations, sometimes you can still find these places because, you know, data sources reveal things about us that we don't think about, right? And we all use services and devices all the time without really thinking about what are the privacy implications of those. And that's a huge area of study, of course. And we could look to things like the journal of location-based services for people who are quite expert in that area for some guidance.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Dr. Amy. Yeah, that's related to geoprivacy. It's quite interesting topic also. Okay, the second question still from Mr. Ari Cahyono. There is
okay, do we have authority to control the quality? As far as I know, no, there is no, I don't know of any laws that prohibit people from publishing any map they like. Now, certainly, if you published a map that could be considered libelous, someone could take you to court and sue you for that purpose. But I don't know of any way that the government could, if it was data that you compiled yourself and that you didn't somehow steal or get leaked from somewhere that wasn't supposed to give it to you, I don't think there's much they could do. They could try and shame you in the media,
the
maybe.
third question, maybe?
Yeah.
The third question, not advocacy.
Yeah, I don't actually know of any such organization. It would be interesting if there was such an organization. I've never thought about that question. There probably is somewhere in the world, but none that I know of in Australia.
Okay, maybe is there any more question from the chat box? Okay, yeah, just from Ms. Chandra Sarijati. Okay.
Here,
how to put this in maps? Okay.
Yeah, this is a good and complex question. Look, there's a lot of different methods that have been tested. There was about 5 or 6 years ago, quite a nice series of review papers that looked at all of the literature in this area. And so there are many different ways of doing it, some of which are more effective than others. Some of them are side-by-side maps. Some of them are layering information onto one map with multiple layers. But the question of whether it's a good thing to do, I think depends on what the map is being used for, who the map reader is. And I think that the study that I showed from Sarah Babrakan's lab shows quite clearly that it's not always a good thing to put the uncertainty on. Because if it makes people think that the information is uncertain, well, I guess it sort of, we can think of scenarios where the risk of making a wrong decision is very great versus, where it's not very great. And perhaps when the risk of making the wrong decision is not very great, it makes sense to put the uncertainty on the map. But if the risk of making the wrong decision could be life-threatening, for example, maybe we shouldn't put it on the map, because people could then make a wrong decision because they misjudge that risk. And, this intersects really with, scientists who work on risk communication. So really, at least in the case of hazards, we really need to be collaborating with people who work in risk communication to try and understand how people's psychological biases might intersect with the information that we're mapping.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. That's quite true. That we, as a cartography, also need to collaborate with the others, I think. Okay, next chat box question. This is from Munawaro. Oh,
yeah. That's it's also a very difficult question, I think. Yeah, I think it again probably depends on what you're making the map for. In my view, anyway. You know, there are certainly studies of like OpenStreetMap, for example, that look at the quality of the information in OpenStreetMap. And there are places in the world where the OpenStreetMap data is as good as it is from the Topographic Mapping Agency. So, you know, in those cases, we probably don't need to worry about it so much. There are also examples where even if the information is uncertain, it's better than anything, it's better than no information, right? Like we can think of many countries in Africa where the last topographic mapping was done 50 years ago. And you can believe that those countries have changed massively in that 50 years. And so, you know, relying on the official data might not actually make sense in those cases. So I think it depends. The answer to that question, one thing I love to talk to my students about when they ask me questions about, should I do this or should I do that? And they always want to know, you know, sort of they want to have one answer to the question, but my answer to the question almost always starts with, it depends. Right? Because there's so many things that intersect together to make that professional judgment about what is the best thing to do, what is the most fit for purpose thing to do. And that's really where our expertise as cartographers can be brought to bear. And it's where we can contribute something that the average person who maybe can push some buttons to make a map, they don't have that sort of that capacity to put all of those things together to make a good judgment in the end. So that's what we should be contributing to the world, to help other people make good maps.
Okay, thank you. Last question, I think, from the chat box. Yeah, this one. Hopefully it's not quite difficult. I think.
Let's see.
Licensing of the map maker. Okay.
Yeah, it's well, you know, in some countries they do license map makers, right? There are places where you need a professional certification to practice, but I think the tools exist now where people can make maps on their own, and it's pretty hard to prevent them from doing so. So while in some ways it could be an attractive idea, I don't know how you could actually implement it effectively. So I think maybe rather the better thing that we need to do is try and share our expertise with as many people as we can to get people to be able to make maps that are more sensible and to build in smart defaults on software. So one of the things that my research commission is doing in cooperation with the ICA Commission on Standards that's led by Serena Kotzea from University of Pretoria in South Africa. We're actually working with OGC right now to try and write a white paper that will help software developers access more of our knowledge and to really be able, because many people who write the software, they're not cartographers, right? They're computer scientists. They don't know anything really about maps. For them, we're just another kind of data. And so we're trying to make our knowledge more accessible to them so they can be smarter about how they help to build those tools. So if anyone is interested in participating in those efforts, please get in touch with me because we always welcome more people to actually help us with that work. So.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's nice answer because I agree with you that as a geographer or cartographer, we should, let's say, selling our knowledge. It's not only for ourselves keeping the knowledge, but also for the tools of communication in this world. Thank you, Amy Griffin, for your.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the great questions.
Nice to meet you, and hopefully someday we can collaborate.
Yes, hopefully someday we can be in person. That would be wonderful.
Thank you. And now we come to the next keynote speaker, Professor Alias Abdul Rahman. You can check sound. Okay, that's ready. Okay, Professor Alias Abdul Rahman, we have his topic on recent research in 3D GIS. We will have 45 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes for discussion. Before the presentation begins, allow me to introduce Professor Alias received his PhD from University of Glasgow, the UK, in the year 2000. Prior to his doctoral education, he spent 2 years at ITC Enschede. I also from Enschede, Professor Alias. Nice to meet you in the Netherlands from 90 to 91. Yeah. His bachelor education was from the University of East London. He authored and co-authored more than 100 of technical papers, received several invitations as keynote and invited speaker in conference. He's also an editor and author for several books with Springer Verlag, German publishing house, and review for various international journals. He organized the first 3D city modeling workshop in the Southeast Asia region in 2010 at UTM Malaysia. He's a founder for various following international conference series. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Alias to deliver the presentation. All right, Professor Alias, the time is yours.
Thank you, Haji Putra. Right?
Putra, yeah, thank you.
Haji Putra, for your nice introduction. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to talk to this conference. I think 7 GIS Symposium, right? Do you run this every year?
Every year, I think the committee.
Every year, okay, yeah. Right, good. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, please go ahead. That's good. Maybe you can try to put it full screen.
Yeah.
That's good.
Is it full screen now?
Yeah, it's full screen.
Okay, all right. The voice is clear?
Yeah, the voice is clear. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Again, this is my title for this conference, Recent Research in 3D GIS. I come from 3D GIS lab. So the lab established in year 2000 when I came back from study. Now we are basically, I think, more than 20 years on this research, 3D GIS research. So I would like to share some of the recent works that we do. Some of them completed, some of them ongoing. So hopefully more students, will pursue in this kind of research. I think this is very interesting for those who would like to see, more advanced GIS software in the future. So my group basically involved within the software development rather than using the current tools or available tools. Okay, so I will say a few words on the overview and then the recent work that we did or are doing 3D GIS, basically on the database, how to get the record from database faster in terms of data retrieval. So we have we came out with a nice indexing mechanism to grab the record from database. And then I also will talk on the 3D LADM. LADM stands for Land Administration Domain Model. I think LADM also, also a part of the research within UGM, I guess, and also Indonesian Mapping Agency, or BIG, I would say. And then our works on the 3D city modeling with various partners from Turkey, Istanbul, Abu Dhabi, and as well as a local Kuala Lumpur mapping agency. And then we recently we started the kind of 3D aspect within the aspect of, quality aspect of the 3D city model, right? So now there are many, I think now there are many cities around the globe, or major cities at least, attempts or developing their 3D model, their 3D city model, but there is not much research or address being tackled into the how to have a very high quality 3D city model. I mean, by having the repair technique. Because since many of them are quite busy with developing the model, so there was not much work being addressed to do the repair or the quality aspect of the 3D city model. And then the BIM, so the BIM and 3D GIS integration is a kind of our little baby now in terms of research within my lab. So because I think BIM, as I think majority of the conference audience, I think may be familiar with, BIM is basically, it's not new, right? But it is quite new when it comes to the 3D GIS community, because we want to get the the data from the available data within BIM, because BIM contains a lot of data, very rich in terms of 3D data. So we want to utilize this very rich 3D data from BIM model for 3D GIS, so that we don't have to go to the field or maybe try to limit ourselves busy with the data collection. So we just use whatever we have in terms of existing BIM 3D model. So in our work, we also focus on how to utilize this BIM and 3D GIS integration for the 3D cadastre. And then at the end, I will discuss some issues or challenges on these aspects of 3D GIS, LDM, 3D model, right, and then BIM, etc. How this issue affected us as a GIS professional, because I think without addressing these issues, it will be difficult for us to move on for the next few years to come, or at least, right? Because the issues sometimes have to deal by main authority in a country, right? So some issues need to be tackled by them. Otherwise, we will start with the research, just research. So what we need to do is come up with a real solution for the people to use in their daily tasks. Okay, so obviously I will say some words on the concluding remarks. Okay, as a for the 3D GIS, I would say at the moment there are several groups, around the globe busy with the 3D GIS research. For example, if you observe, there are one or two groups in Australia, especially Melbourne and USW, Sydney. In Germany, there are several groups. I think majority of the research group come from Germany, especially from Technical University of Munich, Technical University of Berlin as well, and also KIT, Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, who developed the group that developed a 3D viewer, the nice 3D viewer for a 3D model. Of course, other group in Netherlands, there are several groups in Netherlands. I think the leading group in Netherlands come from Technical University of Delft, where they have 3D GIS research group led by Professor Stotter and also by Professor Ostrom. For information, 3D cadastre are also part of their research or agenda, right? And also University of Twente, or within the ITC, if you like, right? And then, so this 3D GIS group basically, organizing meetings every year since 2006 in Kuala Lumpur. So from there on, we get together every year, more or less now around 16th year already as part of the 3D GIS research meeting. So the last one was held last 2 weeks in New York, but virtually, right? I will share with you some of the nice finding or message that we need to do to share with especially young students or young researchers in this part of the world, Malaysia, Indonesia, so that we can move forward in the 3D GIS research domain. So I would say, based on my observation, I would say 3D GIS is a combination of 2D GIS plus height, I would say, and plus of course other attribute. The other important aspect that we need to aware is the 3D geometry, and then semantics. So 3D geometry give us a lot of freedom to play around with all sort of 3D data. You have geometry, and then you have semantic. Within that 3D geometry, you have several issues. For example, how to create topology of the 3D geometry. So 3D topology is still an issue until today. So that's why you don't see much the real 3D GIS software in the market, right? So without solving this 3D topology issue, then there is no way for us to have 3D GIS software on our desktop, right? For your information, I posed this question in 2004 in Istanbul to Esri software developer at that time. I asked my question at that time was, when this 3D GIS software supposed to be in the market, right? So according to the Esri representative at that time, the answer was kind of 10 years after 2004. So 10 years after 2004, basically 2014, right? But you see, on the 2014 and until today, we don't see this software around, right? But of course, you can see several solutions or a kind of what do you call this? What they call this? Not new, I would say. Kind of what do you call this? Prototype, right? Prototype within the research labs. You can see several works being addressed, being published by several groups within 3D GIS groups. So, but it is not operational, right? Only good for certain aspect of the task, right? So it's not overall, it is not complete, I would say, as far as the 3D GIS is concerned. And then the other aspect that we really need to focus on, especially, for the young researchers, 3D spatial data modeling. So basically, it gives you a lot of freedom if the student or the researcher able to address this spatial data modeling aspect. So once you have this spatial data modeling, so the next step is to get the database, right? So 3D database also part of the research at the moment. You can see not many database available for the 3D GIS or 3D data. What you can have at the moment, basically, for example, 3D CTDB, the one that developed by TU Munich, or at that time TU Berlin, started in TU Berlin with the 3D GIS group by Thomas Kolbe, 3D CTDB. But again, 3D CTDB is quite what do you call this? Not that robust, if you like. There are some issues in order to utilize this 3D CTDB for various set of 3D data. Oracle, I would say, when it comes to 3D, I think Oracle database, Oracle Spatial is one of the leading, I would say, able to handle 3D data, right? But a little bit expensive and not easy to handle, because if you really go into detail how to handle Oracle Spatial, a little bit not easy or not friendly, if you like. And again, the Oracle Spatial database, it is not does not come with a visualization, right? So it's separated between database and visualization. So you have to get a good link. Otherwise, you just get the information without visualization. Okay, and then 3D visualization, it is not an issue, I would say. 3D visualization, you can utilize various tools available in the market. There are many software or tools that you can utilize also for database. But again, we don't have to spend a lot of time in order to get the 3D visualization. So I always suggest to my students not to focus much on the 3D visualization, just use whatever they have. So the visualization package is that we have in the market is, hopefully the student able to visualize whatever data that they have, or to visualize what the output of the program, for example, right? To me, 3D visualization is fantastic. You should be able to utilize those existing tools in the market. Okay, so these are basically couple of words or overview, if you like, as far as the 3D GIS is concerned. 3D GIS will be in the forefront. I come to research in GIS because there are several issues, right? Without having solved this issue, I would say we're still facing the the situation where the real 3D GIS in the market is not available, right? So in order to solve, or in order to have this kind of, or in order to materialize 3D GIS software or tools, then we have to solve all these issues that or aspect that I just mentioned, especially 3D topology, right? The rest is basically not that much, but 3D topology is still an issue. And then I also will talk on the GIS and BIM integration. And then to me, GIS and BIM integration open up a new opportunity for GIS students or researchers, especially, or PhD researchers, because this create a lot of interesting kind of opening for us, especially for your researchers, to focus on. Because by having BIM within GIS, the potential tool is enormous, in terms of benefit. Okay, so and then so basically this lecture, as you can see on the slide, it is more on the 3D GIS, 3D modeling, 3D LADM, BIM integration for cadastral purposes, as I mentioned earlier in the slide. Okay, so I mentioned to you a few minutes ago about 3D topology, right? So in 2004, when was that? 2004, today. It's basically almost 20 years ago. Yeah, so 20 years ago, more or less 20 years ago, we published our work on the 3D topology for the 3D objects, together with colleagues from Hong Kong as well as from TU Delft. So the outcome or the research on 3D topology is still valid until today. So from this first publication on 3D topology, it created a lot of interest within that GIS research domain, within several places in Europe, in Asia. Yeah, we know this because we have meeting every year. So from this, then we expand the research output together with other group members in other places. All right, so you can have a look. Those who like to know more detail on the 3D topology research, you can have a look on this publication, Computer and Geosciences 204. And then what is 3D topology? Basically, we want to find out relationship of of the objects, right? In 3D domain. It's not just left, right, left, right, north, south, like in 2D. 2D topology is basically solved, no problem, no issue. As you can see in various GIS software in the market, there is no problem. Basically fantastic in terms of solution. But when it comes to 3D manipulation of objects, then if we want to get relationship of objects, within that domain, then we have problem, right? So the software not able to give us the right information or the right answer, if you like, right? So in other words, we have to come up with more relationships of these objects so that we supposed to understand better in terms of their phenomena or relationship of those objects. So I would say the research gap here is basically to come up with the special operators for the 3D objects and of course special relationships. And then recently we tested with the 3D topology within the CityGML kind of framework, CityGML as well as CityJSON. Right. There was a nice presentation last 2 weeks on the 3D topology when it comes to CityGML and CityJSON by Hugo Ledoux from TU Dev. So if you want to follow this kind of research area or direction, so you can just Google the recent concluded 3D Geoinfo conference organized by our group at the New York University, virtual, I mean. So I mentioned to you a few minutes ago about CityGML 2.0 and CityJSON. By having these two, we attempt to solve a little bit on the city, 3D model, sorry, 3D topology, so that the various relationship of objects, especially you can see on the right, just an example here, the relationship of object within that little house. So you should be able to find out the relationship of those objects, right? So in this case, the TU Delft group used CMap data structure to talk from CityGML to the CityJSON, right? So CityJSON is, I think, people now thinking whether to, to slowly abandon CityGML 2.0 or something else. I have no idea. But if we discuss CityGML 2.0 with CityJSON, then normally researchers prefer CityJSON, right? because of the way the CityJSON can be programmed a little bit much easier, simplified, simpler than CityGML 2.0. And even CityGML 3.0 is coming up as a standard. So again, I would say these two domains within the data exchange format for 3D model will remain side by side, right? So just be aware that these two domains will be will exist. I would say maybe another 10 to 20 years. All right, unless we new researchers come up with another data exchange format, maybe something else or better version than CityJSON, right? Okay, so the TU Delft group investigated this topology within the quite a number of buildings in TU Delft buildings or campus. So they said it's quite possible to generate all the information with the semantics, right? So together with the with the nice geometry, also able to detect the invalid geometry as well. So UTM, my group also tested the adjacency relationship with this GML. So we are about to start with the CityJSON if we have time. So this is our recent research direction at the moment as far as the 3D topology with the CityGML as well as CityJSON. Now, the next aspect of the 3D GIS is basically here is, I call it 3D special access method, right? It's a way to access a record within database, right? So if you imagine you have large, city, with large data set. So you put your city within your database, and then the next question is to ask, how fast can I retrieve those data? right? How fast can I retrieve those data? This is a very, good question to ask. Now, of course, you may say, okay, I can use available existing tool, right? For example, Oracle database or other database, or maybe as database from Azure. I think they call it Geo database or something, right? All right. So we tested. So we tested our approach. It turns out that our access method to get the data from the database is basically faster than those available in the market, right? Even faster than Oracle Spatial, even faster than Geo database of Azure. So basically, our research now being patented within the university as well as other, so that we can fully utilize this nice indexing mechanism out of one of my PhD student a few years ago. So basically, it involves a lot of data structure kind of programming by using data structure. So you can see here, for example, you have 3D city model of Istanbul. So you put in database, and then what we have to have is the mechanism to get the data out of the database faster, right? Okay, so within that method, or 3D spatial access method, our algorithm basically based on classification, clustering, Voronoi partitioning, as well as hierarchical tree structure. So all these sub method of this access method is our approach to get the data faster compared with other existing tools that are available in the market. So classification is basically, the word classification is a way to classify objects into parallelly piped. If you can see here, for example, you have several buildings, and then what you need to do is to get the maximum of those coordinate within that area. So this classification, we call it parallelly piped kind of classification. And that is the first step. Yeah, this is the outcome of the step that we introduced. For example, you have more than kind of this kind of data. This data we tested using Helsinki city. Actually, the number of data is basically more than 1 million buildings. But the one that you see in the slide is basically only a couple of hundred, right? So within that classification method, you can see the algorithm are able to classify what are the residential area, office data, and then as well as the retail. So it gives a nice classification of this data, right? You can see, you can read more the detail of the algorithm within this publication in the ISPLS journal. You can see on the slide. And then, if we have different data set like this one, a group of supply chain management. So these are basically, the dot is basically represent points for the manufacturer, supplier, and customer kind of data set within that dots. Right? So within that several dots, you can classify into a nice classification. And then second part is we introduce clustering. For example, K-means clustering is normally used by other other algorithm within other existing tool. K-means, for example, but K-means is a problem with it produce more than one cluster. So the idea of this method is basically to get rid of or to minimize the number of cluster, or in other words, to minimize the overlap, right? Because the number of overlap, the more the overlap, then basically it create the redundant. It is not good. Sorry. So we introduce K means plus. So within that K-means we able to get better, better performance and accuracy when it comes to the clustering of those 3D data. For example, those 3D buildings. So this is the pseudocode. You can get detail within our publication, as you can see at the bottom of the slide. So within K-means you can see at the bottom of the slide, you can see the number of overlapping parallelepiped 0, right? So it means if the overlapping parallelepiped is a 0, that means it's good, right? You can see at the above is 4. So the less the number of parallelepiped, the better in terms of performance, right? So this one we compare with 3D R3 with a K-means plus. So it turned out 3D R3 is less. What I mean is our algorithm perform much better than 3D R3. Yeah, 3D R3 is basically available within the Oracle Special. So we basically perform better than 3D R3 as available within the 3D Oracle Special. Okay, so this is the outcome of the cluster 3D building. On the left is a cluster building, and on the other side is basically the other side, the other type of data set. So it turned out that in order to get the data retrieval within our algorithm is much faster. I will show you the graph in the next few minutes. And then what we need to do also Voronoi partitioning. As you know, Voronoi is a nice data structure when it comes to the proximity kind of analysis. So in this case, we add 3D Voronoi into the algorithm, so that we able to get the proximity or proximity kind of analysis or connection between object to object is much faster. Okay, so you can see on this slide is the comparison between 3D R3, K-means, and the last one is the VOR CCDC is basically our technique, right? So you can see the overlap here for CCDC is 5%, K-means 20%, 3D R3 55%. So you can see the 5% mean, the less number of percentage is good indicator. And also the number of overlapping node also very small, only 2, compared with the 3D R3 with 4 overlaps. Okay, so and then we also tested with several operations within that database. We can do some kind of insertion. When you insert something to the database, then you can see the performance. On the graph is the blue graph is basically our technique. You can see much lower in terms of percentage. So that means good performance. So same thing here, where you delete something, then you can see the performance a lot better than with the existing tools. Sorry. And also when you modify something, so basically our technique is much faster than the existing tools. In terms of response time, also much faster, as I said earlier. So you can see with the graph, the blue line is basically it shows our approach in terms of response time. VOR CCDC is the term that we use within that paper. Okay, so we think that this technique give us good kind of opportunity for the next version of the database, because at the end I think people more or less users around users out there looking for a mechanism or tools that are able to give us faster kind of data retrieval. So our approach for CCDC able to do this, I would say around 60 to 80% faster than the previous or existing tools. Okay, and then now I move on to 3D LADM. Few years ago, we sat down together with the Malaysian Mapping Agency to come out with the national country profile as far as the LADM is concerned. So we managed to come out, and then it's official, recognized by the LADM working group within that, LADM within the standard. So this is the paper of the country profile. I'm not sure about Indonesia. I think maybe Indonesia come up with their own country profile. So this is Malaysian country profile, LADM country profile. So within after this country profile, then there are several works being engaged how to utilize this country profile for other purposes. For example, as long as to get the data management, to get the system, to develop the prototype. So it's always based on this country profile that we develop for Malaysia, right? So a kind of a good, nice bonus for our group. And then last September, we produced another paper, design implementation of 3D strata objects. So this is a new kind of research or work that we managed to develop in the 3D GIS lab as part of the 3D management of 3D data based on LADM country profile. So, and then at the end, I will explain to you the prototype that we developed based on this 3D strata objects based on LADM. Okay, this is very new. So those who are interested, you can download this paper. I'm not sure we can download or not, but I think it's open access, right? This open access paper. Okay, so why busy with LADM? Yeah, so LADM is a kind of new research, a new standard for those countries who plan to to manage a land administration kind of a data set for their country. I think in Malaysia, Indonesia, I think this tool is very interesting to look into. I'm very sure. I think I have seen one or two papers from UGM on the last 3D cadastral workshop last 2 weeks, right? From UGM, I think by Trias and his team. So that means LADM is going on within the Indonesia. So you can see here I put the Netherlands, Russia, Israel, Greece, Croatia, Korea, Turkey, Brazil are busy with the LADM at the moment, right? But not much on the 3D aspect, right? So basically, even in Malaysia, LADM research basically initiated by academia, for example UTM. I think same thing with the Indonesia. I think maybe UGM is the leading group in Indonesia as far as the LADM research. So based on this, we extend LADM to 3D, as you can see in the paper a few minutes ago. Okay, so this is basically the basic 4 classes, or core classes of the LADM. So you have LA party, RRR, and then you have special unit, and you have the BA unit, basically more on the administrative kind of class. So within these 4 classes, you can expand into several classes, depend on your scenario, depend on your situation. Yeah, for example, in Malaysia, so you can see here the blue classes is meant for 3D data set, and for the pink or beige basically on the 2D. So these are basically the conceptual data model based on the LDM for 3D objects as far as the Malaysia scenario is concerned. So yours, I mean, Indonesia may be different, depend on your situation. This is the for Malaysian case. All right. So from the four core classes that you can expand into other subclasses. And then we also did something on the XML schema for the strata objects, because as far as the 3D building in Malaysia, when it comes to 3D cadastre, we started with the strata objects. Strata objects mean, you know, kind of a unit within high-rise building. So if you have high-rise building, you know, a high-rise building contains several floors. In one floor, you have several units. So that particular unit, we call it strata objects in Malaysia. So the National Mapping Agency, they started with a XML schema to start with. So that means we have to transform, or we have to convert whatever they have with the XML schema into the LADM. So there are several works been addressed by my student as far as the XML schema into the LADM. So a kind of conversion, if you like. So this is the strata XML to LADM. So you have to do this kind of, this is the basic workflow. So you have to do the conversion, and then you have to have map file, and then everything needs to be mapped within LADM schema. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you will have your database. And then from that database, you can do some queries. This is the prototype developed by my student a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, and now almost finished. Basically, the prototype able to give you some query visualization. Bear in mind, the visualization only by using QGIS, because at the moment we don't have much freedom when it comes to 3D visualization for the database. So however, we managed to get the QGIS as a visualization tools for the data that come from database, right? So from there, from database, then of course you can do some query, as you can see on the slide. Okay, and all right, now I move to the 3D city modeling as the part of our research. Started, I think, this kind of a new research in our lab. I think since 2010, right? Since 2010, because 2010, as Mr. Chairman mentioned during the introduction, we organized the first 3D city model workshop around this region. There was participant from Singapore, Singapore Land Authority, or like a BIG Singapore, participated in this workshop. Malaysian BIG, if you like, also participated, and other participant from other part of the area, for example, Sri Lanka, Thailand. Indonesian participant at that time, I'm not sure, maybe none, because 2010 is quite new when it comes to 3D city model. Yeah, but however, from this 3D city model kind of first workshop that we organized together with the TU Munich at that time, then the Singapore Land Authority, start their research or start their project, and then that's why you see now Singapore basically, when it comes to 3D, is basically completed. Right? It is based on our workshop in 2010.
5 minutes more, Mr. Alias, Professor Alias. Yeah. Oh,
okay. I have to be very quick.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is basically the several areas that people normally use city 3D model to do kind of tourism application, cadastral mapping, environment, training simulation, navigation. I think majority of this application as far as the 3D model is basically on navigation and architecture planning and urban urban or city kind of planning purposes, right? This is from Colby 2010. I mentioned to you about the workshop. And this is from Klaus Nagel. He presented this in 2018 in TU Delft during 3D Geoinfo conference. So this is basically to show several potential applications that we can come out with once you have 3D city model with you. And this is a simple example. If you have 3D city model or 3D model, and then you can have kind of, this kind of application. You can have noise mapping, infrastructure planning, 3D cadastre, solar potential estimation, shadow estimation, for example, utility management, visibility analysis, right? So my observation for information so far is basically not many works being done for the underground when it comes to the 3D model. Yeah, it's a lot of works within surface or above the surface, but not many for the underground objects. So that could be something that the student need to be aware of this. This is potential, potential question that you need to ask when you develop the 3D model. I think I'm not sure. Yeah, you can read this. Yeah, I will leave this slide to the organizer so that the audience can read later. I can share this with the organizer later. For the time being, okay. So this basically I'll go to quickly. Right. CityGML. Basically, you have 5 levels of detail. So you have LOD 0, LOD 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is LOD. This is CityGML 2.0. In future, I think next year or so, CityGML 3.0 will be in the picture. So there are several works can be used within the CityGML 3.0, a new kind of standard. Now for this is, I go quickly. This is for the local scenario. So for example, if you have mosque or masjid, so LOD 0, something like that. LOD 1, you have just a facade, and then LOD 2, you have a kind of a simple roof together with the LOD 1, and then LOD 3, you have a structure, yeah, the nice structure of the facade as well the roof, right? And the LOD 4 is basically within the indoor objects. Okay, this one within CityGML 3.0, you have more detail for each level, right? So this one proposed by Philip Beliecki, our colleague from National University of Singapore. He did his study, a PhD at TU Delft, and then came out with this new level of detail for each LODs, right? So that means each LOD contains 4, another 4. So that means altogether you have another 16 LODs within CityGML 3.0 new version, I will say.
I think the time is up, Professor Alias.
Yeah, I will go quickly. This is potential. Okay. Yeah, just 1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay. This is collaborative application. Another application that you can do within city model, citizen participation. This is also from Klaus Nagel. Integration of BIM that you can design of the building based on your city model. And then, of course, you can get the data that you would like to have once you have the data, and then get something from the local authority or the authority that manages the building, city model. And in the future, I would say more underground will be revealed, yeah, as far as the research as well as the standard. Okay, and then 3D analysis, obviously this is a kind of standard what if scenario. People love to have this kind of scenario to see the possibility of the phenomena within your area. Now, how to get the data? I go quickly, very easy, how to get the data in 3D. So people use photogrammetry. This is for LiDAR, mobile, as well as the, this by using panoramic images. This is from the one that we did for Istanbul city a few years ago. And NADE and oblique photogrammetry also part of the data collection, not by not by Istanbul City, but by Abu Dhabi. So underground is something new, will come out very soon. For those who are doing a lot of data processing, you have to be aware that not every software able to do this classification automatic. So that means you have to have classification within a kind of manual, if you like, right? So manual kind of classification. To have automatic is not easy. Okay, and then building detection also need to have manual detection because a lot of software not able to do this automatically. So, for example, this is example LOD Istanbul City, yeah, and then example LOD3 Istanbul City. You have nice what you call it facade with a structure, and then another example of LOD3. Again, Istanbul. So in Istanbul, you have a lot of complex objects like mosque. So this is another issue when it comes to 3D model generation. So we have a lot of cases here in Istanbul City. LOD4, okay. This is our output, basically mix of LODs for Istanbul City. You have millions of buildings in Istanbul City. It comes with a mix of LODs. Now, why database? I think you can go through later. I will pass this slide to the organizer so that you can so that the organizer can share with the audience. I'll go quickly. This is the one that we proposed to the Istanbul City Authority. Before pandemic, right? So we engaged with the city Istanbul City Authority just before pandemic. So now we just started quite kind of slowly, yeah, because online is not that easy. Okay, this is Abu Dhabi. We engage with them for this planning stage, Abu Dhabi city model. These are basically the thing that they plan to have. So we engage with them. Again, this is before pandemic. Few months before pandemic. So this Abu Dhabi 3D workflow, you can see basically from area for airborne LiDAR data 3D into the training of the people who are supposed to develop the 3D model for Abu Dhabi. They want to have the best 3D model in the world. So they don't have problem with the money, I would say. Sorry. Now, Kuala Lumpur 3D. Yeah, we started 2019 with LiDAR data, 3D map, 3D carousel, the part of the data. We use 3D CityDB as a database, but it is meant for 3D carousel, not for other purposes. It is ongoing, it's not completed. So a lot of issues are still ongoing at the moment, need to investigate. So this is basically the framework that the framework that we utilize to develop Kuala Lumpur 3D city model. Yeah, I go quickly. This is a sample of the LODs from the data set that we captured. Again, the combination of the 2D and 3D vector data. So integration is one of them, another issue. So another example, LOD0, LOD1 within the Kuala Lumpur 3D. Yeah, LOD2, LOD3. So this is basically the workflow, and we also need to do some quality checking when it comes to the 3D model. But we did not do repair. We just develop, but we don't do repair because the repair is not part of the not part of the requirements, if you like. Okay, so for the old LOD combination of LODs, so I think at the end we supposed to have the PostgreSQL database. Okay, so another quality aspect, we started this one very recently. So question that we need to ask, what is the quality of the model? Is the geometry valid? Yeah, how to repair this? So this question is basically our latest PhD student or PhD work in my lab. Yeah? In order to answer this question, we have to do a lot of investigation. What is the best way? What's the best technique? What's the best algorithm? And other things. So with this, I would like to, I think let me go through this few minutes. Yeah, this is our work. as far the geometry, sorry, as far the repair technique, I go very quickly. This is, we already presented this one last 2 weeks, 3D Cadastra kind of workshop in New York 2 weeks ago. I will go quickly. This is the tools that we developed. A lot of some programming involved with this user interface. So we managed to get a kind of a complete, not complete, I would say, but at least managed to repair simple building like on the right side, on the blue bottle. Okay, so this is the outcome. So next we want to go into more complex 3D objects. What happens if you have this nice complex moss with kind of geometry? Okay, so I would say I need to leave this one, and then I will go to last slide. Last slide. Yeah, you can also download this paper, the recent publication on 3D Cadastra. You can download within this website. You can read it's available within the website, so you can just download and enjoy reading this latest publication when it comes to the Cadastra. So we organized this last 2 weeks in New York virtually. Okay, I go to the conclusion. Yeah, sorry, I have some slide, but I will go to conclusion. Yeah, I would say full-fledged 3D GIS and BIM is as a complete system basically not available at the moment, or if you like, it is not available. The major problem is 3D topology, 3D spatial operators, geometry, semantic mapping, and of course standardization of 3D data exchange format as well. So, however, you can see based on my observation, I would say the current gap is getting narrower and narrower because there are nice research effort between academia and major vendors around the around the globe. So I would say this is good sign as far as the research is concerned, 3D justice is concerned. So we're going to have more and more better solution in the future. So I have to thank my colleague, Dr. Rizal from Country Garden, my previous PhD student and current PhD student, Hanis and Asim Muhammad. So I think with that, I would like to invite you to come to this workshop, LEDM workshop 2022. Will be in Croatia. I think this one will be could be hybrid, yeah? not for sure. I think hybrid. So we're going to discuss this LEDM workshop coming March April to 2nd April. And then I would like to invite you to UTM GIS conference coming September. Right, you can see on the slide here. I think more or less focus area is GIS, geometric photogrammetry, and other emerging technologies. I think I have 1 minute to go. Sorry about taking a lot of time. And then I also would like to invite you to our next conference, Geoadvances. It'll be in Istanbul. I think this one will be face-to-face in Istanbul. So with that, I think thank you very much, Aji.
Yeah.
Putra.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Alias Abdul Rahman. It's very nice and informative and also interesting talk.
Sorry about the time.
No worries. It's very good information basically for me from National Mapping Agency. It's very interesting. Okay, maybe the question from the chat box, the committee. Okay. There is one question, I think, from the chat box. Okay. Can you see the question, Professor Alias?
Is spatial data quality component that proposed by Gupti and Morrison 95 still relevant with the spatial 3D quality nowadays? I would say the basic still yeah. I would say still valid. I would say.
Okay.
But you know that Guptill and Morrison was 1995. It's quite not that recent, I would say. So maybe we need to move into the 3D because I think that 95 Guptill Morrison is not much on 3D, I would say, right?
Yeah. Okay. The next question, I think. Okay. The second question.
Yeah, for example, top of object, if the roof similar in area observation, is it okay? How about rural multicultural area with a lot of variation of roof shape and facade? Do you have any idea to generalize, compensate at various top of the building? Normally, thank you for the question, Adi Cahyono. Basically for the roof of the building, we just use whatever that we can see from the area photogrammetry kind of images. So a lot of generalization involved here. For the detail, depend on the application that the people or the client would like to have. So for the detail, I think not many system able to generate detail. But I think normally most of the city, if you go, for example, Rotterdam, even Singapore, even Helsinki, kind of generalization kind of buildings. It's not detailed, unless specific kind of project. Yeah.
Okay, maybe from the audience, is there anyone which would like to raise your hand? Please go ahead. I will ask my colleague from National Mapping Agency, Mr. Krishna. If there is no question, I have a question on a 3D city database, I think.
Yeah.
Would you explain more? Because I think we left this part of the presentation about 3D city database that you propose for Indonesia, for example, because we know that Indonesia have slum areas and in some cities, something like that. What kind of maybe approach on building this schema on something?
Okay. Thank you, Aji Putra, for your question. I would say depend on the because at the moment what we normally use is 3D CityDB. Yeah, 3D CityDB is a kind of a database developed by a group of researchers from TU Munich, right? Originally from TU Berlin, but now they moved to TU Munich. It is meant for objects based on 3D city model, right? So if you have 3D city model, for example, for Jakarta or for Jakarta or for Bandung, for example, you have the 3D city model, then it should be all right to use 3D CityDB, right? However, it is not every data set that you captured from your data collection technique able to be generated by the 3D CityDB. Yeah, there are some issues to convert from CityGML to other or from other format to CityGML. So it is not straightforward. The other option is, of course, one of the best is to use Oracle 3D kind of database. But again, you have issues not easy to link Oracle special 3D with the visualization, right? Because Oracle come up with without visualization. So yes and no, if you like. So depend on the other thing is depend on the population of your data, right? Huge data set, I think maybe special, Oracle special, or there are cases where they try to use CityDB as a database for New York City, partly able to retrieve the data, but partly not able to retrieve. So you can see the works, the utilization of CityDB database for New York City, the city model. So there's a paper within the SPRS journal, so you can have a look. Or the other part is, if you want to know in detail, there is a publication within Photogrammetry Week 2017 or something. Specifically talk about how CityDB handle 3D object within New York database, right? So there was a publication you can download. You go to the Photogrammetry Week conference, then you can download, search for City GML goes to Broadway's New York, then you can see the paper. You can download the paper, right? How to manage, how 3D City DB manage huge objects within New York City dataset. All right. Is that answer your question, Aji Putra?
Yeah, of course. Because recently we still in discussion about this type of 3D City DB and yeah, etc.
Is there any participant from BIG?
Therefore, I asked my colleague Ratna Mayasari and Krishna Arimjaya. Would you like to discuss with Professor Alias?
Is there any 3D Jakarta at the moment?
From BIG, we still in the research phase, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have tried to develop this kind of 3D city models using 3D city DB and etc. Maybe my last question is about you mentioned in your last concluding remarks that recently several groups, academia and major vendors, it is a good sign. You mentioned that for the outcome of the 3D city. What do you think that let's say as academia, what we should improve in our research related 3D GIS? For example, you mentioned about 3D topology or 3D quality aspect.
So I would say, now if you look into this research aspect of 3D GIS, now people are busy with the 3D city model at the moment. And also 3GIS and BIM integration. But people are getting away from the real problem with the 3D GIS, which is basically to me 3D topology. Right? So 3D topology is still an issue. So without having solved this issue, so I would say the new version of, the next tools, next tool will be a little bit hard to manage or handle whatever 3D data that we have. Of course, people try to manage 3D data as best as they can, but when it comes to 3D topology, maybe we have to close our eyes half, maybe 2.5 topology, something like this.
So do you think that the existing vendors such as S3, something like that is?
No, they don't have. They don't. There is no solution at the moment from them.
Okay. So basically, you develop your own tools.
Yeah. For example, Esri, there is no solution. Bentley also no solution. Bentley. The best is at the moment is Bentley, I would say, compared with the Esri, right? Bentley is learning from the Singapore 3D project.
Wow, that's a nice question. And one of the slides that you skip is about the 3D city modeling. It's, I don't know, a lot of question about query. For example, how many buildings, trees, traffic light, how many stories. I forgot which slide, but you mentioned a lot of query that we should consider, I think.
Oh yeah, the question. Those questions we need. Exactly. Thank you for the to remind me. Basically, if we develop 3D city model for our city, so those are the questions that we need to ask. If we're not able to answer those questions, that means we are not really having real 3D city model.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Okay. We have one chat box. It's send it to me in direct message. From Munawaro, she asked about what is the next issue about 3D city modeling besides topology. You mentioned about 3D topology. What the other issue that?
We have to still expand the 3D topology. What's the name? Okay. For example, the 3D topology within CityGML is not solved.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the one that I showed to you or discussed with you in the earlier slide is basically from CityJSON, right? So there is a group now, basically try to address this issue. I think better than the one that with the CityGML. So 3D city model, sorry, 3D topology within CityJSON is much better than with the CityGML.
Okay, thank you, Professor Alias. My last, maybe more last question. I was interested in citizen participation. What do you think about citizen participation in developing this kind of 3D
city what?
Citizen participation.
Citizen participation. Yeah, of course.
Participation. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, when developer or when local authority or when national authority develop 3D city model.
Yeah.
So normally it is meant for application, right?
Yeah, true.
So I would say normally people develop this for the purpose of city planning.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So that means there are many people stay in the city, right? Many groups. It would be good if people like us who live in the city able to talk to the developer.
That's true.
Yeah, so that part of the citizen kind of participation. Otherwise, the city model is become like a white elephant, right?
Yeah.
There are many white elephant there are many white elephant city model around the globe.
Okay, so it is already implemented in Malaysia or in which countries?
Yeah, as far as Malaysia is concerned, we just started.
Okay, that's nice.
Yeah, it is just started. I think the best for you to learn, basically the best 3D city model is from Rotterdam.
Rotterdam. Okay.
Yeah, Rotterdam is one of the best 3D city model, I would say, because they're able to give kind of nice application to the citizen. Yeah, so that's what connect to your question here a few minutes ago, because citizens now able to engage with them.
Yeah.
Rotterdam. So try to Google Rotterdam, and then you will see the nice application. Some data you can download, some data is not possible, but just see what they have in terms of 3D model for Rotterdam.
Okay, we still have 2 more minutes before the closing. Maybe you can provide a closing statement, or beside you suggest us to study from Rotterdam, is there any
I would say
for Indonesia in building this kind of 3D city?
Okay, I would say since many cities now busy developing their 3D model, right? But there is an aspect that many people did not aware that, which is very important. I think the quality aspect of the model. So they are not focused at the moment with the quality aspect because they are busy with the developing here, developing there. So the quality is secondary. So that's why one of my recent PhD students are focusing on how to repair and come out with a real good 3D city model. So that once we have good quality 3D city model, then your next application will be accurate. Right. So that could be my last statement for this today.
Okay.
Hopefully,
yeah, thank you so much, Professor Alias. Okay. I really enjoy this kind of.
How can I leave this slide to you?
Maybe you can send it to the committee or to chat box to.
I can send to the Sanjeewana, right?
Sanjeewana. Yeah.
Sanjeewana.
Thank you so much, Professor Alias. Ladies and gentlemen, finally we come to the end part of our plenary session. We want to thank two honorable presenters for the informative and interesting talk, and of course to the audience for being actively involved in the discussion session. Hopefully today's presentation will be beneficial for everybody. I appreciate for your attention. And now I come back to the committee. There will be a photo session, I think. Maybe we can try to turn on our camera to have this photo session together with the presenters and committee. Yeah.
Yes, we could have a photo session.
I bring it. Okay. Oh. Thank you so much. Oh, how many participants?
I think we will take the photo and
Yeah, okay.
maybe you can.
Thank you, Mrs. Hadi.
Okay. Are you all ready? Okay.
Smile, smile or not? Salam sehat.
Okay. We'll take the photo in 3, 2, 1. Okay, next slide. Wait a moment. Okay, next slide. Wait a moment. Okay, finished. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Alias.
Thank you. How can we get the photo?
We will send it to you.
The committee will send it to you.
Email
Yes.
to me, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor
Thank you,
Alias.
everybody. Thank
I will
you.
email my
Professor
slide.
Hadi.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Dr. Ami Griffin, Professor Alias, and also Mr. Aji Putra Perdana for the interesting session. And we will have a next session, which is workshop session at 11. So we will take a short break for like around 13 minutes before we start our next session. So we will have two breakout rooms. The first breakout room will be a session from Cartography Laboratory, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and we have breakout room number 2 with Dr. Novi Susetya Adi from Ministry of Maritime and Fisheries Affairs, Indonesia. Thank you.